Good evening. I would like to welcome you to the April 22nd, 2024 School Board Work Session. The time is now 5:30. The School Board would like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Sanderson,
Here.
Ms. Marati,
Here.
Ms. Maple,
Here.
Mr. Doran,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett,
Here.
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Mrs. Hardy.
Here.
Thank you. The board has a quorum.
Next, I will pass it over to Ms. Diana Dillard, the School Discipline and Policy Specialist with Dr. Meinert to lead us through this next work session.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to look at the few remaining policies that we have with Article 9, Board Bylaws. We've put committees off to the end because it was going to be a more in-depth discussion. So there are two policies in regards to school board committees and an administrative regulation. And then we did bring back one policy to discuss 9311 on school board policies and how those move through the board process. So we'll leave that for a second. And then after we hopefully do get through these Article 9 policies, the goal is to finalize the feedback tonight with Article 9 and then go through and get Article 9 ready for two packets that would be going before the board for the implementation process for policy, I think on May 7th is the goal. So that would be one packet of policies that didn't sound like there was much more discussion on, and then a few policies that there was going to be more discussion on with the board process. So with that, I will start with Article 9, Policy 9130, School Board Committees. There was, well, you can see highlighted in this packet at the very end, third paragraph to the bottom, there was some question about maybe the language around will solicit volunteer membership, maybe not being accurate. However, in the administrative regulation, it does speak to how those members come to the committees. And we can talk about that more because I think one of the other questions was specifically how volunteers are chosen from the community and parent groups. And then we were going to choose between one of the two paragraphs here at the end of this policy. Following each committee meeting, the committee chair will provide updates to the school board in connection with committee-related topics, activities, or board actions was the first option. And then following each committee meeting, the board member representative will provide an update to the school board during the committee report item on the agenda.
Mr. Doran.
I'm going to speak first to the will solicit wording and suggest that that is a good wording. Prior to about 7 years ago, board members solicited their members for the committees and appointed their members, and it became extremely problematic. Lots of vacancies, committees weren't able to do it, and watching this now for the last 7 years since they did that, since the board had made the change, this has really worked well. And though we do have some vacancies, much less, and so I'm strongly in support of having this process go through in that broader solicitation.
I've got a list if people want me to. I did homework. Okay, but I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. So not related, it's this committee, but I'm just going to go through my list instead of specifically each one of those things. Something that was noted in an email from Mr. Burgess was, and this might be more in the AR than it is to this, but I kind of feel like we can talk about it all together, to fix what we define quorum as. So I'm going to quote his email since he did a great job. So to paraphrase Robert's rules, a quorum can be defined by bylaws and should approximate the largest number that can be depended upon to attend any meeting. And he's got the references to Roberts if we need them. A quorum for a standing committee is defined either by the bylaws or as a majority of members if the bylaws do not provide a definition. So we can add a section to our bylaws relating to standing committees that defines a quorum for a committee as a fixed number of voting members. He suggests 3 to 5. Our committees are about 17. When I looked through them, depending on the committee. Alternatively, we could use a proportion such as 1/3 of voting members. And not all of those 17 are voting members. But the rules recommend against this because of the potential for confusion. And then the benefits, this change would have the benefit of allowing business to be conducted when fewer committee members show up, which I know has happened a few times on budget and other places, while still allowing us to maintain their status as board committees rather than administrative committees. So that's open for discussion. Ms. Burnett.
So, sorry, I'm trying to put together everything that was just said. So, with that second option, that would make it to where you don't need as many members to vote, but it's not recommended. So, is that correct?
The 1/3, I think it's because it's a fraction, and so having to determine some committees are 17, some committees are 18, and knowing what 1/3, and Mr. Burgess might speak to it, he's already pulled out the Roberts rules, that it adds to the confusion of what exactly a quorum is then, instead of just establishing a set number. Committees shall have a quorum of 5 or more members.
Got it. So, I just want to speak to the fact that I'm already facing a no quorum for tomorrow or for Wednesday. And so while I understand that, that might confuse and blur lines, it might be better in our situation, especially if we aren't interested in looking at the number we have on our committees. This would allow us to still hold those quorums if we're shy, say, one person showing up to a meeting.
Ms. Sanderson.
Yes, I really would like a fix for the size of our committees. They're too large. And this has been a problem for a while. When we did our AASB development, we discussed this issue. And so I would like to see it pared down to a workable number, and then to take into consideration Mr. Burgess's information about the quorum.
We're going to go Ms. Marati, and I will say I have committee size also on my list. Ms. Marati.
I've talked about this before, but I just want to remind the board that there was an ad hoc committee that was created in 2022 to review all of the committees, including the size. Ms. Sanderson and Ms. Smith were both on that committee with me. And there was a recommendation that was provided to the board to reduce the committees to 10 and how that could be structured so that all stakeholders are still represented. No action was taken on that recommendation, but I'm happy to go over it again if the board, the current board would like to know, and if that has any weight on the recommendation from Mr. Burgess.
Ms. Burnett.
I would absolutely be interested in hearing that.
Excuse me. So the ad hoc committee, we realized that different committees had different number of members. So we wanted to uniform each committee to the same number, same type of membership. And that would include keeping school board chair and keeping admin exempt, both non-voting. Changing the teacher seat to 1, the support staff seat to 1, the principal seat to 1, the student seat to 1. There's a tribal consultation member, that's 1. Community members, and it would include parents and non-parents. It would be 3. And what are we at now? Same committee structure. All would be 10. Yeah, that's the admin. Yeah, so keeping the chair and the admin exempt, those are both non-voting, and then everyone else is voting. So that's 10. So it still includes every stakeholder, it just reduces everyone to one, instead of having heavier on different seats. And that was agreed upon by the 3 ad hoc committee members at that time.
Ms. Burnett?
So what I have experienced, I know there are members here who've been here longer. Usually all we get is one of each at our board meetings. That's pretty commonplace. It happened all last year on curriculum. It's happening with parental engagement. And I can't even fill the ESSA seats right now. And I know that that's also a commonality problem. So I'm wondering if maybe we should honor having that more in-depth discussion tonight then about reducing the number in our committees, as it would make sense. It would help us be more productive. I understand not wanting to reduce the number of stakeholders 100%. I understand the hesitation with that. But as I see it, not every committee is getting every stakeholder at their meetings anyway. I know that's horrible language to use, but it's true.
Mr. Doran?
I'd like to suggest looking at the quorum until after we look at the numbers of people, because that may have a real impact. I think it's on all of our, well, I know it's also on mine to trim committee size. Except for the specific vacancies, Budget Committee in the last year has been quite well. We've easily made what current quorum is without. But I think if we focus on what our sizing is appropriate, and then talk about quorum, because we could put a fraction in there that actually means very, very few people, and we're not really getting our stakeholder. And I think as we all try to, sometimes we pick a date, suggest a date, and yes, that is not a good date, and we have to adjust accordingly. But let's look at the size, set the quorum aside for the time being, and then see what's appropriate based on those sizes. And one other thing I would say with it is that we go committee by committee, because there can be good reasons to have a larger group on some committees than others.
Dr. Minor?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. If we could go committee by committee, I love the suggestion of paring it down. But when I was looking at potentially the curriculum committee and the policy committee, maybe having more educators on that, not reducing it down to just one, since those on the curriculum committee, they would be our subject matter experts there, which I think would be really important. And then on policy, that directly affects them every day usually. And so it'd be great to have their voice at the table.
I'm totally in support of moving it to that. So I would say let's start with audit, which is different, and that one should be pretty quick. Yep.
Just a reminder from the 2022 ad hoc committee, the recommendation for the audit committee was to actually change it from a committee to just a charge of the treasurer. So it's essentially getting rid of it as a committee, because it's not actually not a board advisory committee. It's a seat on another committee that's actually a joint group with the borough and the utility gas. So.
Yep. Ms. Maple?
Before we get into that, just for the sake of this first, do we want to select one of these sentences before we move on to the next? So it doesn't get,
If that would help, I think so too. I'll put in my vote for number 2. Not vote, but recommendation, because we don't take official action in work sessions. Anyone have opinions on which paragraph? Mr. Doran?
I have an opinion that number 2, the second sentence, is a better one, although I would also suggest striking for policy purposes during the committee report item on the agenda. It has varied and, depending on president and whatever. And so it just leaves this open whenever that is. We give a report, whether it's during comments or during a specific committee report time. It gives the flexibility down the line.
Ms. Marati, then Mr. Burgess.
I guess I'm just asking for the chair to maybe explain the process in today's work, because, for example, there's another sentence in here that's not highlighted that talks about how the board chair shall select the legislative committee assignments of the 2 board members, but I know that we've talked as a board about making that a committee of the whole, and so I think there's some other things in here that we're going to need to dissect that aren't highlighted for tonight's work. So I'm just curious how that's all going to work out.
I'm with you there too. I figured we'd bounce back and forth. I made my list to cover that one and then the AR that went with it because they're just so intermingled. So yes, I definitely want to at some point bounce back and talk about that. Is it a problem for us to talk about, fix that, which paragraph we want, and then come back and adapt our policy once we fix in AR those other things?
Not a problem at all. I'll just, stop and ask clarifying questions if I need to. And as far as the highlighted point, Ms. Marati, that was kind of the main big questions that were left over from the last conversation, but we can definitely look at everything in this policy.
Right. So we're going to go back to just deciding the highlighted part, and then we'll go through each committee separately. Mr. Burgess.
I agree that the second option there is preferable. And I would say that if we do strike the language that Mr. Doran suggested, that we replace it with during the next regular school board meeting.
I'll put in a comment for that. I prefer keeping it, not only because I made that change, but also because I feel like having it as a specific part in our agenda is a really good practice. Robert's Rules supports it, and it makes it so that these committees, part of it I went through, if you guys still have this packet from ASB, they also gave us a whole work Timmy did on committees, and I reread that today. And a big point of there was committees, if you're asking people to do this, you need to honor their work and take it seriously. And having a dedicated part in our agenda where we report out the work that our community is putting in free of charge as volunteers, I think starts to honor that work. And when we leave it to board comments at the end, it rushes our board comments. We don't feel like we get a chance to say anything else. And it's also sometimes so late in the evening, no one's really listening. So it makes sense to have it its own separate report time. Ms. Burnett.
Thank you, President Hardy. I actually wanted to say just that. There have been times when we have been in board comments and it has been so late, or another board member's comments, and this, again, this is not a jab, this is just a general statement, but when maybe a board member's comments or an admin's comments maybe go a little long, and then we kind of all get stuck in this rut of, okay, I can't talk about this, this, or this, because I want to be a little bit quicker. I have actually really liked having our own agenda spot for committee reports. I think that allows us however much time we need to be able to report on it. That's where we are in the agenda. We can talk about our committees. Sometimes, last meeting, I had 30 seconds. Other board members have longer. I just, all that to say, I support this language and our item on the agenda for it.
Mr. Doran.
Still favoring the second sentence there. And given my suggestion, it really is not a big deal whether that wording states it or not. It doesn't say where on the agenda it is. So it's wherever those putting the agenda together puts it, that's fine. I just like more brevity in policy and less specification in policy. Leave other things. So, but it's not a big deal.
Seeing no further discussion on that, are we good? Number 2? So then bouncing back to, and it's the AR, if you're wondering where I am. And I think there's not page numbers, but it would be the 3rd page in the packet we received today, if you're following along. Ms. Marati has stated just striking the audit committee entirely, as it is not really a committee. It is a borough function, and I'm in support of that. In the packet received today, it's the backside of page 3. Or I guess page 2, backside of page 2. The other one's page 3.
Oh, Thank you.
Is there any discussion on striking the audit committee from the AR?
Ju-
Mr. Doran?
Just very much in support of it. It's not our committee, it's who we point to the borough's committee. And just so long, and I think we're clear on it showing up elsewhere.
It's under treasurer.
If we needed something, yeah, I think that's enough said.
And I'm pretty positive, Ms. Dillard, but you can check that it's underneath the responsibility of treasurer. I think that was the one hesitancy. So next, we have budget committee. And that lists where the current members are. My one thing that I would add to this committee, but not necessarily in this spot, but where we define where they change maybe, is just something that talks about how we have 2 board members, and I kind of saw it as one is learning how the budget committee runs. And that was, I think, part of why they structured it that way, but that's not anywhere in our AR. So kind of making that part clear, why it has 2 board members instead of just 1. Ms. Marati, then Mr. Doran.
Just for history, I was on the board when the board president suggested and the board made that decision. And I recall that you're correct, that the reasoning was for a newer board member to sit with a more experienced board member as the experienced one as the chair, newer board member as the other member, and then as they learn and get experience, they can move into the chair position or not, but that's their ability, time to learn about the budget.
It was Mr. Doran, right? And then Mr. Burgess.
I'll address the budget committee, but just that we make sure we come back to page 3. There's another point that I want to make sure we bring up. The budget committee, I think it can be trimmed and it should be trimmed, and I'm looking particularly at trimming one of the at-large positions, making parent and community members or at-large more equalized. I would make an argument for the budget being a larger committee because of its impact and the various complications of it, that having the broader stakeholder support. Now, am I wedded to it being just trimming one? No, but I can see it as being a larger committee and broadening support. The other thing in terms of this, and was alluded to with a previous comment about, for FEA and principals, FEA particularly, the importance of having sort of someone from secondary and from elementary. I have been an elementary principal. I've been a secondary principal. There are different perspectives. Sometimes they meet and sometimes they don't. And again, and I think especially with budget, it impacts each level a little bit differently, and I think that perspective is valuable both from the teaching and from the principal position. ESSA, I'm a little bit, and then they've already had troubles filling positions. I'm less see the need specifically for somebody from each level. And so I will say that the ESSA, we had one member from there and did a really good job. So
I think it's Mr. Burgess, and then back to you, Ms. Marati.
I agree with Mr. Doran's comments. I do think that there is value in having a larger reach with the budget committee in particular. I do think that we can trim down the number of at-large community members in particular, possibly the parents as well. But yeah, I was actually going to say very similar things about how it's important to have a secondary and an elementary representative from each of the categories there, principals, teachers, and support staff. But you know, this is one where we should also definitely, if we do keep it large, we need to define the quorum so that the business can get done and when people can't show up, because that, you know, that can be an issue. Yep.
Ms. Marati.
I just realized my comments are about the first page that we skipped, so I can wait till there and just to support Mr. Burgess's recommendation on combining, and this is what the ad hoc committee wanted to do too, is combine parent and community seats into one category and then reduce that down, not to limit the number of community members or parents, but to make it in line with the rest of the structure of the committee.
I'll put myself in since I don't see anybody else. I had also thought combining would be a good idea, calling it maybe community. My one concern is that saying at least, so if I was thinking 4 to 5, depending on the committee, that at least 3 of them have some connection to a student in the school. So mine would be grandparent or, you know, parent or foster parent, or it's the other part was using the word parent. Not every kid has a parent. Every kid has a guardian or somebody who is looking out for their best interest. So also if we're going to clean up, coming a more inclusive term, but where they have a child in the schools, but then still allow for at least 2 of the members to not have any connection to a currently enrolled student. And then I support Mr. Doran's comments about keeping an elementary and a secondary teacher and support staff on the budget. I also, having been on that committee, feel like they come from very different perspectives, and there's a good reason for that committee to be bigger, especially in this current world of cutting. It helps to have all the perspectives present at the table. We're going to go Ms. Burnett and then Mr. Burgess.
Yeah, I think with budget, it definitely needs to be a bigger committee. That's a huge thing that we do, and especially with our budget situations right now. But I really wanted to speak to combining that parents and at-large community member. I would be in favor of combining that. And I understand the need to make sure that they're connected in some way. And I think most are, when they apply, they are connected in some way or form. But like I look at curriculum committee, and I know we still want to keep that big, but that's 6 at-large community members and 3 parents. We could reduce that to a total of 5. I know we're on budget right now, but same with budget, we could reduce that. That's 7 right now. We could take that down to 5 altogether, and that would reduce the committee and still keep all the stakeholders and everyone else, and the principals and the support staff and the teachers.
Sorry, it was Mr. Burgess and then Mr. Doran.
Yeah, thank you. The other component that I think is a good reason to keep the budget committee slightly larger is that it helps to educate the community when there's more people participating. So outreach and education is another reason, I think, to cast a wider net, and I'm wondering how, I support the idea of merging the at-large and parent categories. I'm wondering how that language would be crafted to provide the preference to someone with a connection to a student, whether it's a guardian or grandparent or whatever. I like the idea, but I think the language might be tricky.
Mr. Doran.
I'm just thinking on the language, maybe parent slash guardian, so the emphasis is on the parenting relationship that's there. I would, on the budget, again, because of the nature of what it deals with is, I think, having two at-large, okay, so cutting two, going to two. I wouldn't merge them because their interests are quite different, potentially. I mean, there's a common interest for kids, but with budget, we're also looking at that community-wide support. We don't have to bond like other states do. But they bring that community perspective, a broader community as not having someone in the school, but yet they're supporting, they're paying those property taxes and stuff, and can be important spokespeople to the borough and to the state legislature. So in terms of with budget, I think that at-large voice does serve as well, and that if we absolutely can't find somebody, then backfill it with parent guardian. But I think in budget, having that at-large voice is an important stakeholder voice to have.
I'm not forgetting somebody who signed up, right? Ms. Marati, I thought there was. I couldn't.
Nope, it's gone.
I'll speak to, I don't have an issue with keeping them separate. I think that's fine too if we go parent slash guardian, and then at-large community down to two. I would like something that I've been done in practice, but we don't have it in policy, is saying that the community at-large members can be parents or connected in some other way if all the parent seats are taken. And I think that allowed us to fill more seats this year. Ms. Marati.
Another thing to think about is that, for example, Anchorage doesn't have a board advisory budget committee, but they have a finance committee, but it's board members only, similar to the borough assembly. But that would change a lot of things. But it was something that we explored, so I wanted to put it on the radar because that would change this whole conversation.
Ms. Maple.
I just wanted to, the parent-guardian conversation is a conversation that the policy committee was having at a broader level about the entire manual, about all of our policies. And if we are able to settle on how we want to move forward with that, that could be a built-in fix for where parent occurs on these, within these committees, just for what it's worth.
Ms. Marati, then Mr. Doran.
Another option instead of parent would be like district connected or school connected. That really opens it up. Like, I don't know if it gets any broader than that while still being connected to the district.
Mr. Doran.
Yeah, I was just thinking on that one, and I'll come back to my other one, is I think the concept of parent guardian, whatever, is important. And we do make a distinction that is not an employee. And district connected we're all district connected. Everybody in the borough who just even by taxes, we're district connected. So I would rather, I think when we talk about parents, we should have them there. The idea, I think a budget committee is very different from the finance committee, depending upon how that's looked at. I look at our committees as really a chance to hear from stakeholders. And we act as, we do the finance thing basically the same way the assembly does, and I'm not sure exactly Anchorage, except that they call we call our budget work sessions, they call them finance committee and stuff. So we're small enough, we do act as the finance committee. We deal with the finances. So, but I think this budget committee, as with others, is really to try and get a little bit more personalized stakeholder involvement in the various aspects.
It was Ms. Marati next, right? No? Okay. I need to start writing it down. I guess I'll put myself in the queue. I had things to say. I support also not switching it to a finance committee of the whole. Big reason being when I spoke both times to our borough assembly about our budget, I laid out just how robust our process was in that document that we gave them. And part of that was we also had a budget committee that met, that we listened to, that then reviewed our work. Like, our process puts theirs to shame. We have so much community input in what we do and an understanding. And I think that cutting that would hurt. And then I guess I'll say I like 5 and keeping them 2 separate if that's kind of where we're gelling. Any other discussion on budget committee? Ms. Marati?
I don't know, this might sound nitpicky, but I think if our goal is as a whole to reduce the number of people on our committees for quorum purposes, which is where this conversation started, 4 to have to be district connected in some way, and then 2, whatever, for the parent / community member seat sounds, I mean, at least we're trying to reduce in that case. And I know it's just one different from what you said, but it just seems like it's more of a significant reduction to keep our quorums manageable and our committee smaller.
I'm okay with 4 as well. I just thought people would get mad if I said that low. It was originally what I wrote. Is that a hand? I can never tell, Mr. Doran.
That's a hand.
Yes,
Yep.
Mr. Doran.
So your suggestion is to cut parents to 2?
That's, I think, what Ms. Marati was suggesting was,
No, I mean, if we're combining them, then it could be 4 parents, but what we're saying is that we need at least 2 of the 4 to be district connected or parent, however you want to word it. And then the other 2 can be parent or community member, however broad you want to go with that.
I think Mr. Doran wanted to keep them separate, but we
Oh.
can add it for at-large can also be parent, and then the same thing is achieved.
Yeah, then yes.
Okay. Yeah, and 1, 2, 3, I mean, it's all, I like having 3 parents on. I think it's a reasonable number without too many. But gives also a broader thing that maybe we might find somebody with different grade levels, their kids. I think budget impacts the services directly that their kids get. And so having that voice there, I think, is real important. And the mutual support that sometimes parents give to each other in that. Going to that large at 2 that's fine. I think that's fine. I think there should be some effort to get at large. But if we don't, I'd rather have a voice at the table. And so maybe by the time that first meeting, if we don't have a at large, that, but we have extra parents, then yes, get the parent in. But I think there should be an effort on our part to solicit an at-large voice. And again, very specifically within the budget because of its impact to our entire community, and we need our entire community's support because they pay the bills.
Ms. Sanderson?
Yes, I would just speak to say, we do need to adjust the size of the committees smaller, and all voices are heard in the sense that not only the people who are on our existing committees will help us do the work, but we spend an enormous amount of administration time and resources in surveys for people and community people and parents and everybody to give us input. They fill out those surveys and they give us the input when, they don't come here to testify or, write us an email. They participate in the survey to supply us with information we're asking for whatever project or focus that we're working on. So voices are still having multiple opportunity to communicate with us and to give us input. So I'm for us to stay focused on cutting the committees and, aligning them so that we can be more efficient with our work.
Ms. Burnett?
I would like to be in favor of being more efficient with our work. We are 45 minutes in almost and just on our first committee right now.
I think the work will, I think it's going to build on each other. Some of these discussions were broader, and then it will move quicker. I have confidence in us. And to that end, to summarize, it's sounding like people are okay with 4, keeping it separate, parents to at-large, community members to, changing parents to perhaps parent/guardian. And then can we, somewhere later in the AR, to Mr. Doran's point, define that at-large community members may be parents, but every effort should be made to find an at-large community member first before filling with parent positions?
Yes, and I think I tracked everything that you just said, except the numbers were getting a little bit confusing. So do we want 2 community at large and 2 parent guardian for a total of 4?
I'm seeing yes, but then I saw Mr. Doran hold 3 fingers.
I'm 3 parents too.
Oh, he still
at
wants 5. Is there-
I went 3 parent guardian, 2 at large.
So that would
Is
be
my-
5.
Is my favorite.
Okay, so we do have, how, at this point, is there anyone else that is wanting 5 instead of 4?
I mean, I'm okay with either. I think Mr. Doran makes a good point that for the budget committee in particular, it's something that can directly impact the students of parents. So, I'd be okay with either. I think that making an effort to reduce the number is a good thing, and we have done that with the at-large members. But I'm okay with keeping parents at 3, if others are.
Ms. Maradi, was that a hand?
Yeah. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I do want to point out that only reduces the budget committee from 18 members to 17 members, which is really, really large. And I feel for whoever the chair is next of that committee with that large of a committee and having to get a quorum and all that. So.
Okay, Mr. Doran, and then I'll put myself in the queue.
The observation, it cuts it to 16 members from 19 currently. The other thing is, just as we all remember, remind myself, this is the AR. It doesn't have to go through a bigger process. And so whatever we settle on, we see how it works, and we can always adjust.
I'm going to throw my support behind Mr. Burgess and Mr. Doran. I've been on the committee. We reached quorum. It didn't seem to be as big of an issue. And since Mr. Doran has been the chair of that committee for some years now, I will defer to his judgment. I'm fine with keeping it at 3. We've reduced some, and I hope that we reduce more in others.
And can I just confirm that there was no discussion about any other reductions from other positions, correct? Okay, thank you.
Okay. So,
Just make sure you got the support staff went to 1.
oh. Because we barely ever managed to get 1 on all of our committees. You're
and
right,
there-
there's an equity thing, if that's where you're going.
And there, okay, well, in trying to get smaller, where I saw that is, we did have representation, we had 1. It's not as important in the support staff to have an elementary and secondary perspective. And so I think the person who came spoke well for across the board within that.
Ms. Marati.
With all due respect, I think for perspective, look, to reduce one group and not the rest of the staff groups, that looks wrong. And I don't care if it's elementary or secondary split, but reducing that number, it just feels really, really wrong. And so I don't support that at all. I apologize if that's offensive.
Ms. Maple.
Perhaps we could remove the requirement that it be elementary and secondary specific, that it could just be 2 support staff representatives, and maybe that would make those spots easier to fill if there weren't those qualifications on them.
Mr. Burgess.
I'm going to throw my support behind that.
I also support that. I don't think equity-wise cutting their representation is right, but allowing them more flexibility since those are harder positions to fill.
I have no objection. I mean,
Yep.
I have no, budget, having an extra person at the table is good, so.
Mr. Burgess.
So since this is still a large committee, do we want to talk about quorum, setting a quorum for that committee in particular right now before we move off to another one?
Ms. Sanderson.
Isn't the quorum based on the sitting positions, people who are already seated at the, who are part of the committee seated in the meeting? Isn't that what the quorum is based off of?
So a quorum, if it is, according to Robert's rules, if a quorum is not defined in our policy, it would be, the default would be half of the members of the committee, half of the voting members. But we can define it in policy to whatever size we want. What I'm not 100% clear on is if we can identify specific seats that need to be present. But I'm less worried about that than just setting it at a reasonable number. And so my suggestion, if we want to talk about quorum right now, is that if we've reduced this to, 16, that our minimum should be
17. It's 17 now.
Is that including the non-voting or just the voting?
That
includes non-voting.
it's 14 plus 3.
There's 2 board members, right? So 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so I would say that 5 would be a reasonable number to, in order to just make sure that the business can be done. I would honestly really hate to have a meeting with less than a third of the people present, but the budget committee is an important one, and it operates on a timeline that needs to be met. So I think that, setting a number that's high enough that we could, what does Robert's rule say? It says it should be the largest number that can reliably be expected to show up, essentially. That's a paraphrase, but so I think somewhere in the range of 5 and 6 is pretty reasonable, and that's, and workable.
Ms. Burnett?
Procedural question. A quorum, can we set it per committee? Can we set rules per committee? So like each committee could have a different quorum rule? Okay. Absolutely, but okay.
So by my count, I have Budget Committee at 16, which would,
You go through that, because I keep
Sure.
getting 17.
I have Board Chair,
Mhm.
Chief Operations Officer.
So there's 2 board members.
Oh, there
So
we go.
17.
See? Because
Okay.
I didn't count 2. You're right, it's 17. See? Good job. So then it would be, half would be 8.5 people, if we were doing a traditional quorum. So Mr. Burgess's suggestion is we go down to 5. I think with so many non-voting members, that might turn into a meeting of an operations officer, 2 board members, and like a few other people.
To be
Yep.
clear, I would suggest that we leave out the non-voting members when we're calculating quorum.
That's what we do on all of my committees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So it's 14.
5 plus 2, or 3, so 8.
Mr. Doran.
I would just go with the majority, or half a majority. It's simpler, and you want at least that many people there for this. And I will limit it at the moment to Budget Committee, but I think it's simpler. And that's why we have the committees, and we ask people to let us know if they can't be there, so we'll cancel a meeting or postpone it if people are out of town, those types of things, especially with people a lot of jobs and stuff like this. They may not know 3 months down the line, but I think it's easy enough to work and to make sure we get enough input, so.
Can I ask a question? Have we been defining quorum in our committees, including voting members, or including non-voting members?
I'm not sure personally.
Ms. Burnett, you said your committee possibly won't have a quorum tomorrow. Is that based?
Only
removing-
voting members, not admin, not myself or my admin included.
For the curriculum committee, we've been counting only the voting members.
Okay. I've never actually been a committee chair, so jumped right in. I wasn't sure what we've been at. I think hearing that, if we don't define a quorum, it makes it hard. I know that Budget Committee has been getting it, but if we're saying that we're reducing numbers and then we're also defining a quorum in order to not have to cancel meetings, this is the time to make these changes. And maybe we just go down to 6 instead of 7. But that gives us some flexibility. Ms. Maple and then Mr. Burgess.
I would encourage, I think the point that Mr. Burgess made that is sitting heavier with me in this Budget Committee one is that the input is really important. It is also tied to a pretty strict timeline. And so while ideally we'd like everybody at the table, I would hate for not being able to meet quorum to mean that we're not able to have that conversation, even with a smaller number of people, in a timely enough fashion that it gets done in time. Timely in time. You understand what I'm saying?
Mr. Burgess.
Yeah, I was gonna make a similar point. I definitely hear Mr. Doran's concerns about, wanting to get all the input that we can. My concern is that if we have to cancel a meeting, And we do have, on a committee that has timelines like that we don't get any input at all. And so that's a bigger problem. So.
Mr. Doran?
I'll leave this as my last comment on this particular thing, is that when we set up times, we're trying to find a meeting time that works for the majority of people anyway. And to a certain extent, the quorum is mute because you're trying to get the majority of people available. Budget is does have some timelines, but we've got flexibility within that, and it strikes me in some ways we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. We have not had any issue in getting a meeting time that worked for far above the majority. So.
Are we wanting to table the quorum or move on? I thank you, Ms. Burnett.
I hear what Mr. Doran is saying, absolutely. But just because the budget committee isn't having issues doesn't mean that other committees are not, and it really is a problem. I said this earlier, Ms. Poland just sent out another email today to try to gather a quorum for my meeting on Wednesday. Ms. Marati and I have been waiting to bring this resolution forward, and so while I understand the importance of the budget committee, and I'm not trying to disavow that in any way, shape, or form, we really do need to, and the budget will pay the price of the other committees in trying to bring things down, but we really need to look at that and our quorums, and I appreciate that the budget committee gets the people that we need to have there and are able to have their meetings as they are to have their meetings, but that's not the case for every committee.
So I'm hearing two different views of maybe we set a total quorum for all committees or we set them per committee. I would recommend, so that we can keep moving, that we pare down our committees and then we circle back to setting a quorum. Okay, so are we all fine with the budget committee? The changes were a support staff becoming open, secondary or elementary, doesn't matter. Parents moving or staying at 3, at large moving to 2. Okay. And then we're going to move on to curriculum committee. I can start off that I think paring down, leaving parents and paring down our community at large would make a lot of sense, the same as we're doing there. I don't know if we want to go to 2 or 3, but that's around where I'm at. I see a 2 from Mr. Burgess, a 2 from Ms. Burnett, a 3 from Mr. Doran. We're not voting, by the way. We're just saying what we like. Mr. Burgess.
So my understanding from Mr. Beam is that in past years, the curriculum committee hasn't had much of a problem with quorums. This year we have. We've had 2 meetings that we had to cancel so far on curriculum, and this is another committee that operates on a timeline, and the feedback is important to get. So I also, as far as who's showing up, it's actually been difficult to get people from all of these different seats this year in particular. But the at-large community members, I don't think we've ever had 6, even though all those seats are filled. I would definitely support paring that down. I think that we, on average, and I'm not sure if how accurate this is, but I think we've had 2 at-large members show up at the majority of the meetings.
Ms. Burnett.
as the previous curriculum committee chair from last year, I would just like to back up what Mr. Burgess is saying. Last year, we as well canceled 2 meetings. We actually sat at one until about 6 o'clock, waiting to see if we could gather a quorum, and it never came to be. Again, I will back those comments with the at-large community members. We've only ever had one show up when I was the chair. We only had one parent show up. We only ever had one teacher and principal show up as well. I would not be in favor of reducing the teacher or principal positions, as this is curriculum committee, and the ones that did show up, and I know that the others, if they could be there, they bring in valuable information that we just don't know. But those at-large members and reducing the parents down to 2 from 3, 1 parent minus 1 is not terrible.
Is that Mr. Doran?
So I'm greatly in favor of reducing the at-large. It's always kind of struck me as that we have more at-large than we have parents. Even to a thought of, I'd even go, I know I put up 3, 2, maybe 0 at-large, and maybe increase the parent. But having an at-large seat, and maybe 1 might make sense. 1 at-large, and the tribal consultation member is effectively kind of an at-large. I mean, a broader perspective. I think the parent voice on the curriculum is really important. They're the ones whose kids are most impacted, and they've chosen to bring their kids to the schools where they're having this curriculum. So they've chosen this curriculum, and their voice there is really important. So, maybe at large 1, parents, I could go even increase that by 1, but getting a significant reduction.
Ms. Anderson?
So last year, we were conducting our business around curriculum and the textbooks. The textbooks went out to all the major schools where parents, community people could take a look. They were housed down here where people could take a look. I believe the sign-up sheet was like 13 and 11 or something like that. And we heard, a great deal through letters and email and testimony. So again, the district spends, the quality time making, printing, what's being reviewed, when it's going to come up, where you can look at it or view it or have input about it. So the committee, I'm for paring down the committee.
I'll speak to support of moving parents up to 4, since parents are the ones whose children are guardians. The students are the ones who are encountering our curriculum, so they have a pretty big stake, and they're choosing to use our public schools for that curriculum. Moving at-large down to 1, and that would make it an 11-person committee, I believe, if I did my math right, or 11 voting member committee, which would make quorum 5, which seems manageable if we just did half.
So
Mr.
quorum
Doran,
would be 6.
because we have to go up 1? There we go. See? I would be in support of making quorum 5. Let's just go there. And I'm writing down what I think quorums, and we'll circle back for committee. But is there anyone who objects to 4 parents, 1 at large? I'm not seeing anybody. So if we're good with Ms. Dillard, we'll,
Just to make sure that I'm on the same page, I have 2 non-voting members and 11 voting members. 1 being community, 4 being parent, and nothing else changing to those numbers. Okay, thank you.
that is correct. So then we move to diversity.
Just a quick note, I don't think this is terribly important, but we have had more than one administrative staff representative show up for all of our curriculum committees. And I don't think it needs to go in the AR or anything, but, you know, there's kind of other administrative members.
Part of the AR actually says that the superintendent can appoint additional non-voting administrative members. It's just in a different spot, so we're covered. So moving on to diversity committee, keeping with the same theme, we have 3 parents and 7 at-large community members. I would be support of bumping up the parents a little bit and cutting down at-large community. Ms. Marati.
One of the goals since before 2018, I think it was more like 2015, of the diversity committee is to understand diversity throughout the community. And so I think that's why there's such a big push in community, because the community representation is what really leads to diversity within the district. And so I think that's why there's so many community members. So I wouldn't recommend reducing it to 1, like the curriculum committee, but it could be reduced a little bit to be in line with other committees. I will say, this is the second time I've been the chair of the diversity committee, and not once have I ever had an issue with quorum. So quorum's not an issue on the diversity committee when I'm the chair of it. Nor was parent engagement, and I don't think I was on a committee last year, so, yeah. And we only have 1 rep from each association, so it's already pretty pared down, more than other committees.
Mr. Burgess, and then Ms. Sanderson.
I would definitely support reducing the number of at-large community members. Hearing Ms. Marati's explanation of why that number might be so high, I do value the perspective of all of our community, and maybe that gives other folks a chance to step in who would like to give feedback on the district because maybe they're thinking about coming to the district or something like that. You know, I mean, there's reasons that hearing other diverse voices from people outside of the district could be useful. So I would support reducing that number maybe to a total of 3. So taking away 4 seats, at-large seats. And that would bring us to 12 non-voting members, I believe, or 11 non-voting members. Or, sorry, 11 voting members. Apologies.
Ms. Marati.
An example of the need for a number of community members. We have 1 voting member right now who just joined the diversity committee who is not district connected or in any way as a parent guardian, but they work for FRA, and they saw the work that the diversity committee was doing with the disability awareness and wanted to be a part of that. And so that's one example of many why we have such a community strong committee. And I won't die on the hill of 3, but I would love for it to say 4, or to go to 4 at the least.
I was thinking 5 is where I am really excited that you have someone from FRA.
Where I was like, I don't want to say 5 and look like the weirdo.
And I do see, and it's that weighing whether or not diversity committee should remain a board committee or become an administrative committee. If it were administrative, then we could never have to worry about quorum, and we could invite as many people as we wanted. But yeah, I know. I get Ms. Marati's points about why it has these bigger numbers. in community, and I have watched a few of the diversity committee meetings, and they bring important perspectives. So, and I've never chaired that committee, so I will defer to the expertise of someone who has. Mr. Doran.
This is just a general observation, and I think what the value of this conversation is really, what do we want from each of our committees? And what serves us well, rather than getting hung up on a specific number in a sense. So just a general observation, as it's pushing my, as I think about how each committee, and I guess linked with that is, I'll say at this point, it's good, is the fact that we have experience on different committees, that we do have the rotation, we'll talk about that a little bit, is I think really important. It's, none of these committees are ours. It's not Tim's budget committee, it's our board's budget committee. And the fact that sometimes one might like to stay longer on a committee. I've been in that position. It's good to move and see another aspect of things. General comments.
I guess trying to keep us moving along. Is everyone okay with 5 community members then for diversity committee? Or are we landing somewhere else? Melissa? Or Ms. Burnett? That's
We're in a work session, we're okay. I actually don't get offended by not using my last name, so it's okay, guys. I'm not gonna die on this hill, which is why I've just been quiet, but I would like to see it less, but I understand, and I hear everybody, so I'm not gonna die on that hill, but I would like to see it less. That's kind of just where I stand.
Ms. Anderson.
I'd like to see it less, but, the committee is a poignant committee, and they're doing good committee work. And it's just a process that we're going through to pare down, so.
Ms. Maple.
I think that diversity committee in particular relies on expertise from not necessarily district affiliated folks in a way that maybe none of the other ones really do. And I think that lends itself to having a larger number there, even though I get it, we're trying to pare them down. But I do think it is that it is looking for a unique array of perspectives, and the point is diversity committee, and if we're wanting to adequately pull a diverse array of views, the more the better. And I know that that has been a topic on this committee before, is are we just pulling views of X, Y, and Z, or are we fully representing our community? And if I wouldn't want to limit ourselves, although I understand in the framework of this conversation that seems a silly direction to go, but that's where I am.
Ms. Marati.
Okay, I think this might be my last comment on this specific subject, but another reason that this committee is so reliant on, like Ms. Maple said, community experts. The district, until just a couple years ago, used to pay a contractor to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion training to the district. And we used to be part of an organization that would then provide training to our staff. And that recent board pass have cut that completely. We don't provide that service anymore, and so we rely even more now on the community experts that come to the diversity committee.
I think I'm hearing that people are okay with 5, and then just, this is AR, so we can come back as a board without a whole lot of process and review this again and change the AR around this time next year if it doesn't look like it's working, or if we want more or less members. It's more flexible than our policy. Okay, so now legislative. and I'm going to throw what I think we should do, and then we'll hear everybody's. I'm in support of making this a committee of the whole, so it would have all board members, and then still include the listed members here. We don't have a district lobbyist, so we've cut one. They're not there. And then my other point in reviewing this today was I think that these members should be drawn from members of other committees. So the parent and our at-large community member and our tribal consultation, because this committee meets one time, generally, maybe twice. And if we want well-informed people to help us develop legislative priorities, it would be beneficial to have ones who have been being a part of the discussion in other ways. Ms. Maple and then Ms. Burnett. Oh, sorry, Ms. Burnett and then Ms. Maple.
I just want to say yes to all of that.
Ms. Maple.
For the community representative, I will say that this past year, the legislative committee, our parent rep was not pulled from another committee and instead was a parent that has experience in all things advocacy in the legislature. And I'm sorry, I'm so slow to talk tonight. My concern with it being a committee of the whole is that if it is a committee of a whole, it will not just be one meeting. It will be many meetings because it is so hard for us to make decisions. And this is a very decision-heavy committee, and we had to sit down and make a lot of decisions, and I fear if it's a committee of the whole, it'll just spiral. But I will go with the, what the majority wants.
Technically Ms. Marati and then Mr. Doran and then Ms. Burnett. I will speak just to one thing you said, which was the main reason that I'm proposing that it comes from other committees is that amazing parent that we had because of our policies is then not able to join any other committee because she's already been on a committee, and we limit people to one committee assignment. So this way we could have an amazing parent and have them help with legislative. But that was my thoughts. Ms. Marati and then Mr. Doran.
I don't have a strong opinion on whether it's committee of the whole or not, but I do have a strong opinion based on the success I saw and the legislators' reactions to our district having a parent on the committee that came with us to Juneau. Every single person that we met with, every single legislator that we met with, when we said this is our parent, we were the only district that brought a parent to the fly-in. And they were all blown away that we had a parent there representing Fairbanks. And so because of their reaction and because of how successful that parent was, I highly encourage us to increase the number of parents and increase the number of community members on this committee. And I know I've been touting we need to reduce, whatever, but because I witnessed what happened when we were able to show this, that has completely driven my encouragement to increase those two positions on that committee. I also think that this committee needs to meet more. I know that we only meet once or twice to set the legislative priorities, but this committee could be used for legislative education and opportunities a lot more, and we just don't do that. So I feel like it's a lost opportunity, and we could absolutely use it more productively and more efficiently.
Mr. Doran.
I like the makeup overall of this committee. And I think it's really important because, and especially when I look at the different components, we all carry different, all the members on this committee carry a different perspective and message to Juneau. And how, so what's the FEA FPA, ESSA priorities, that we're bringing it together in complement to the district. Sometimes each of those groups have little different priority, but we work, and having done that for many years from the FPA side, work in complement to the district, even when we've had different perspectives. So I think having them at the table there is really, really important. I would say district lobbyists should be listed, and maybe in parentheses if there is one, because I think it's really important that we want the lobbyist part of this, if we have one. This is very different than the committee, and pardon me that I always smile when I hear committee of the whole. This all comes back to us. We all act, and we're going to have the final say on it, etc. But this is an opportunity to really bring, with strong board presence, all the different groups together and perspectives, and say, what do we have in similarity? What do we have in complementarity? What are some of the ideas that might be juxtaposed? And I not in favor of drawing that from the committee, from another committee. I think it deserves its own, and it is often enough met multiple times. It's somewhat of a shorter time frame, but as was also suggested, it doesn't mean that it has to all happen in that month before the legislative session. That it may be coming together and offering some strategizations into the session. I think I've covered all my bases on that.
Ms. Sanderson.
So, piggybacking, I think, on something Ms. Marati said about increasing the parent. I think this is the only committee that doesn't have a student. I don't know how that could work out if we could make room for our student rep to be on this committee and give their political voice, because the last 2 years we have heard from so many students across the state of Alaska. I don't think the legislators heard them, but they were passionate. I mean, they took it right up, in your face, respectfully. But, they knew what they were talking about, and they talked from experience, they talked from impact, and they talked about, the burden of it not being funded. So if we could make that happen, I'd be in favor of that.
It's going to go Ms. Marati, Ms. Burnett, then Mr. Burgess, and you don't have to wait for me to call on you. When one stops talking, it's not a board meeting.
Was Ms. Burnett before me?
Ms. Burnett, Ms. Marati, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Ms. Marati. Not picky. First off, Ms. Sanderson, thank you for that. I 100% support if we can get our student rep on here. Ever since I've gotten on the board, we have been blessed with some really amazing student reps who have really had a great voice. Ms. Smith was amazing. Raul, Mr. Lopez, he was even better, and I can't wait to see. Yeah, I don't mean it like that. I know I didn't mean it like that, but I just can't wait to see where our next student rep goes. Like it's just amazing what these students are doing. So I support that. But ever since I've gotten on this board, I have consistently requested one thing, and I will continue to request this, and that's I want this to be a committee of the whole. I will not shy away from the fact that there has been times that I have felt that there have been members on this board whose voices have been not silenced, but maybe not allowed to show their opinion or be a part of something as much as they should have been. And I think that each and every one of us has something to add, and silencing somebody, again, that's the wrong verbiage to use, but not allowing somebody to fulfill their full potential on this board, especially when it comes to our legislative priorities on our legislative committee and helping make these decisions. I just think it's a great thing when we can have all voices on board. And again, I know we're trying to reduce, but if we, I request we be a committee of the whole.
Just to throw support to Ms. Hardy and Ms. Burnett's Committee of the Whole request that was also recommended by the ad hoc committee when that committee met. And then also, I also want to show gratitude to Ms. Anderson for bringing up the student rep. On the flip side, our district was one of the only districts that did not bring a student to the fly-in, and that was very, very, for lack of a better term, embarrassing. So maybe having a student rep, especially if it's the student rep, having a student on the committee will encourage this board to send students to Juneau.
I just want to support those comments. I think that it's a great idea to have a student rep, and it would make sense to just use the one that's on the board, because they would be easy to, it would be easy for them to step into this, and they're, presumably, hopefully, knowledgeable. All of the student reps that I've ever watched have been pretty amazing, and I think we need them there. I would also like to support Ms. Marati's comments about increasing the number of parent representatives. And I do not have strong feelings about whether or not it's a committee of the whole.
Mr. Doran.
I appreciate the student piece coming up. I think giving preference to the student rep on the board, but basically they get first option. I am cognizant of they're usually students who are involved in a lot of different things, and they are committing to at least 2 board meetings a month, so they have a fairly heavy schedule there. But I think, yes, they would be a great voice on the legislative committee, and a good learning opportunity for them, which is what we're about. What Ms. Burnett was saying, and I'll address it later too in a more general way, but I think in terms of voices that we want to hear, that's one of the things that we perhaps can do better, to see how we have a breadth of voices there. I'm not in favor of as a whole, committee as a whole, because I'm afraid we lose these other voices that is there. They would not be as involved in the conversation. How we do it when it does come back to the whole board is maybe building in, perhaps in a sense, a report, and then the action of adopting the legislative priorities. That might be a way of addressing that, so we do get the whole voice in there rather than that last minute, oh, we've got to make a decision tonight. But we get an intermediary piece there. Or the way the legislative committee report is given after the meeting, so board members have a better way to across the board. I don't want to lose those other voices, but I do think that Ms. Burnett brings in an important thing that impacts all our committees, that we want a range of voices that's there. And I'll talk even more on that later on.
I don't believe anyone else is in the queue, so I'm going to put myself in. I'm going to speak one more time to still making it a committee of the whole. And this was something, same as Ms. Burnett felt last year, I felt that way. And that's not a criticism to anything, but it felt like voices aren't equally heard. Our assembly does their legislative committee as a committee of the whole. This isn't unusual. Other places do it as well. And I actually think that there's more power in having every board member there with these other people, because they get to directly speak to board members. How often do we have the entire board plus the superintendent, every president of every union, plus parents and tribal representations in the same room discussing our community, that's a powerful meeting. And I think that it is on the job of the president, who's the chair of that committee, it's their one thing that they chair, to make sure that they have those voices be heard and that it doesn't become a board meeting with a few advisors, that it becomes a real committee where we discuss and now they get a real vote. And I would have preferred we switch it to a committee of the whole earlier in the year, and we didn't. And I went through the process as it was, and I did feel like it would have been great. Later on, Ms. Burnett and I went to Juneau together, and that was powerful, and I would have rather had her input in what we were doing in the process instead of trying to make up for it during a board meeting. And Ms. Marati and then Mr. Doran.
And just to add to that, my notes say that Sharon Tuttle mentioned that in previous years, the legislative committee for the district was a committee of the whole.
Mr. Doran.
Okay. Partially clarification and then a thought. You were talking about committee of the whole, and then you were talking about committee of the whole plus all these others, which is different than just committee of the whole.
I guess I'm using the term incorrectly. When I mean every board member and these members are a member of this committee.
Okay, so that all the board members are on that committee. Okay, and I think that is more appropriate in terms of what you're talking about. My concern is then just checking where that stands in terms of taking a vote on those legislative priorities. That if all 7 members of the board are on the committee, and typically we don't take votes. So I'm just working this through. It's just some questions I don't have the answer to.
I
and
can
I'm just trying to
answer to that.
factor it out.
I sat in an Assembly Finance Committee just this weekend, and they voted and passed a budget out of finance into committee. So you can definitely take votes in committee, and they don't bind members later on when they're on the board. It is the committee's vote. That's why it's a separate committee and not a board meeting. Ms. Burnett.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I've watched the borough do this, and that's exactly how that works out. And when it comes to a quorum, that's an easy, for this committee, a majority. And that would be pretty easy to garner literally every time.
Mr. Doran.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and that's good. And I do want to say that, yes, it's not arguing against the thing, but several times it's come up. The Assembly has some good things. They do some different things, and they have different responsibilities than us. So I'm not looking to just mirror what the Assembly does, but we can also learn from things. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize, and if people have strong feelings, let me know if it's going to stop. I'm assuming then that we're saying all board members are a member of the legislative committee. The president remains the chair. We add the student rep, and then this was talked about, but I don't think we came on a final decision, possibly moving parents to 2. I'm not seeing objections. So, and then still keeping district lobbyists, but have it say if a district lobbyist is available. And we invited ASB's lobbyist in, but they weren't like a voting member, but we invited them to inform the legislative committee this year, I believe, right? Yeah. Okay.
So I have all of that. Do I need to clarify in here that it would be voting board members as opposed to advisory members? Does that need to be stated, or is that assumed by board members?
And I have a question.
Is it about that?
Not about the board members, but about what you just said.
Okay. I think it's a board discussion on whether or not we mean advisory members too. I hadn't immediately considered advisory members because they don't generally sit on our committees.
Okay.
Ms. Marati, your question.
You didn't mention the community member. Are we eliminating that seat? So
It
that's
just didn't
staying one.
change.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Mr. Doran.
So that would be a 17-member voting committee. Okay. And I guess if you want comment in terms of the advisory committee members, I mean, in a sense, we have the student already on. The military already stressed. I don't. Necessary.
So next, that one did get bigger. It meets way less, so it should be easier to make.
Good luck.
It's one step forward, two steps back, but we're getting there.
Tiffany's gonna be like, what?
Okay.
I gave her big hugs this weekend, we're good.
The next, we have the Parent Engagement Committee. Ms. Burnett.
That's what it's about.
Okay, I will pass it to Ms. Burnett and then put myself in the queue to just say one other thing about.
Okay, sorry. I just really wanted to speak on this one. So this is a parental engagement committee. I'm going to preface what I'm saying with that. I have had 2 parents show up. It's actually been very hard to get anybody at our parental engagement committee meetings. Ms. Zavril, and if I pronounced her name wrong, but I think that's right. She's amazing, shows up to everyone. We've got Pepper McFarlane. We've got a couple that are there. I just seeing where we're at in that we're kind of in this rebuilding stage with parental engagement right now. I would be in favor of reducing everything to 1, minus the parents. I would like to see the parents down at 5, because it does still need to be a majority, and we do still need to try as hard as we can to get as many parents as we can there. But with the other positions, and I understand where the board will go with this, and before you throw your torches and pitchforks, I just want to reiterate, I first off have not had a single ESSA member show up. I have 1 FEA, I have my staff member, I have 1 principal, and a couple parents, and then the student shows up, which is really awesome. I do want to keep this parent focused. It's a parental engagement committee. But for now, and as this is an AR thing, so we can come back through, but I would be in favor of reducing for now, quorum purposes, meeting purposes, and then see if we can grow it from there. This is a committee that is in the working stages of trying to come back together.
I'm going to, and then Ms. Marati. I'm in support of everything Ms. Burnett just said, and then the one thing I wanted to add in is, though, I do think we need to change the name of it to a Family Engagement Committee.
Yeah.
And then parents to parent, guardian, or, like grandparents. Right now, we have a lot of grandparents involved in our schools that are keeping them going. Ms. Marati, and then back to Ms. Burnett.
Well, the ad hoc committee also recommended a name change. They wanted to change it to the Community Engagement Committee. However, I know that there is a large amount of investment, federal funds invested in family engagement. We're representatives, or we're beneficiaries of grants for family engagement. The state is getting into family engagement. AASB is leading the way in family engagement. I really actually like that better than, but I have to say, it'd be not right of me not to mention that the ad hoc committee wanted community engagement.
And then Mr. Doran.
So I would actually like to speak on that. So I just actually spent the weekend at AASB where we covered a lot of our BBs and actually touched on that family engagement. And this is actually going, so all weekend long, I kept saying parental engagement. I did. And Margot a few times said family engagement. And she said it to me about twice, and then it finally clicked. And it's correct. We don't just have moms and dads that are parenting. We have guardians, we have grandmas, aunts, uncles, cousins, sisters. It's a full range of people that are now taking care of children. I like committee or community engagement too, but this is, so AASB also, like you said, like Ms. Marati said, is leading the way in family engagement right now. And we just covered this whole slew of family engagement stuff, and it's absolutely amazing where AASB is going for it. So I would support changing it to family engagement, but I don't want to change it to community, even though that's great. And I appreciate that recommendation full-heartedly, but family engagement, absolutely.
Mr. Doran.
I was going to say in support of going, with teacher support staff and principals going down to one. I think in this area, yes, there are differences, elementary and secondary, but they're broader, more generic, and can be bridged. I like, family of parent doesn't really make much difference. My only question is more to the administration is, because I know this also satisfies Title I, for instance, and having to bring the parent or family engagement plan, does it make a difference as to what this is called for that purpose?
It doesn't, and we're actually in the process of broadening our language as well. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And that would be my only thing. So the family is great.
So summarizing, it seems like we're taking everyone down to one except for parents/guardians and having that at 5. And just like others, we will circle back to that. Oh, Mr. Burgess.
I just was noticing that, this is maybe our only, or one of our only committees that does not have an at-large member. And, I understand it's about engaging families, people who are involved in the district, but I do think that there are stakeholders who might be interested, and if we're having trouble filling seats, it also makes sense to broaden out that option. I know of someone, I've been thinking of someone who recently contacted me wanting to serve on a committee and wondering where the openings are. They are a parent, but their child is not yet of age to be in school in the district. So, just thinking about either broadening that category so it includes parents whose children will be in the district in the future, or just make it a at-large community member.
Ms. Marati.
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Burgess. I support adding a community member to the parent engagement committee, or family engagement committee, I guess now. I thought about it and then dismissed it, but would love to bring that back because as similar to the diversity committee, the parent engagement committee could benefit from experts in, like, for example, family therapy field or social services field that maybe they don't have a child or grandchild or whatnot in the district, but have expertise that could really benefit the family engagement committee.
Ms. Burnett.
I would absolutely support that, and that would bring us to 11 voting members, if my math is correct.
Okay. And I'm seeing no objections. So now on to policy committee. The same thing we've been doing. This one has smaller, so it's only got 4 community members and 3 parents. I don't know where people feel those should move to, and other cuts. Ms. Maple, do you want to share your policy committee thoughts?
We've met a couple times and haven't had an issue with quorum. That said, our ESSA spots are not filled. Our parents show up. I guess our at-large community members are the ones that maybe haven't been super consistent. with policy, I think that the teachers, support staff, and principals, specifically teachers and principals, for the policies we've looked at so far, have been the really important voices. I mean, the others, they've brought the most to the table to like make sure we don't go off the rails in policies that they are the ones following and enacting. So maybe we don't need the at-large as many of the at-large community members in that one. Maybe we could cut that to 2. But I think in terms of, I'm trying to think, at the last meeting, there were at least 2 parents there. Maybe it could be 2 and 2. 2 parents, 2 at large. I don't know. That's
Ms. Burnett?
I honestly have no either way on this. If that was the direction the board wanted to go, I'd support that, but I'd also support it staying the same. This is policy and a super important committee.
Ms. Maradi?
I see the policy makeup very similar to the budget committee makeup in the fact that it's such a huge piece of the work that we do. I mean, every committee is, but when it comes to like the day-to-day work of a board member, policy is a big piece of it. And so structuring it similar to the budget committee makes sense to me. And the changes that Ms. Maple suggested are what I suggested for the budget committee. So maybe, that being said, that support staff can be broadened out to just 2 and not specific to secondary or elementary. That might help.
Mr. Doran?
So I talk in favor of also that support staff is generic, taking away that element. The elementary and secondary kind of says it has to be instructional support staff, and our support staff is much broader. And then the suggestion of going 2 and 2 for parent guardian and at large makes sense to me. So.
I'm in support of all those 2. I'm not seeing any more debate on that. So if we, sorry, Ms. Maradi.
That's okay. I just wanted to share the notes on policy committee. It was suggested from the ad hoc committee to keep the policy committee, obviously, but to ensure that the charge of the committee addresses a schedule similar to the curriculum committee. So policies are on a schedule of review similar to the curriculum committee. That was the suggestion from the ad hoc.
And I think we did that in our last work session. And I can pull up what it was, but it's added into the new board 9s. It'll go like 0 and 1 first year, 2 and 3 the next year. So that will now be in our policy. So we've pared down our committees. We made one larger, but I stand by it. Do we want to circle back to having specific quorum for committees or an overall quorum that we set? Which, because they're all very different numbers now. They used to all be the same, or almost all the same. Ms. Sanderson.
So I just had a really quick question. Did we set the charge for each committee?
Not yet.
Okay, thank you. No, that's all.
Ms. Maradi?
I think
And Mr.
because we didn't reduce significantly any of the committees, I think quorum should be talked about because we didn't make it any easier. For those that do struggle with quorum, I think that needs to be addressed because we didn't make any changes really.
Mr. Doran?
In terms of quorums, I think having a majority makes sense. I think that if we're not getting a quorum, we need to relook at the committee. And maybe we are asking for too many members. Maybe there's a problem with people understanding what it is, why it's valuable for them to be on it, how they serve or with such. And I look back in terms of history of the committees broader and why we actually went to this type of general structure board before I was on the board. And it came to the fore because they weren't able to get quorums. There was a problem with their committees, and they reworked it, and we've done reasonably well since that time. I think, again, we want the voices, so we do want the majority. We want to make sure that we try to schedule a time that works for people to come. I do think that some consideration should be given in terms of the committees, and this might be a balance point, is a majority absent the vacancies. Because we have had, particularly, two groups that have not filled their positions. ESSA has done some, but not all. FNA, I don't know that any committee has an FNA rep on it at this time. They haven't been filled. And so that ties the hands of the committees if you have several vacancies, and that eats in automatically to that quorum. But if we say the majority less the vacancies, or the majority of filled positions, I guess would be more positive rather than negative on it. And then that's the standard, because we do want to hear from them. And then if somebody's really not getting, then we need to relook at that committee, or those, if it's all committees we're struggling with, as the board was previously, then, it's a bigger issue to deal with.
Ms. Marati, were you in the queue? Okay. Ms. Burnett.
I would actually support that. Just because of the fact that we do have vacancies right now with voting members. And if that is a damper on our quorum, which I'm assuming it is at the moment, I would be in favor of that language.
Ms. Marati.
I don't want to call myself out, but on committees that I've been chair of, the voting members, in order to decide the quorum, were the ones that were not vacant. So it was only filled seats. So it was half plus one of the filled seats, of the filled voting member seats. So having vacancies doesn't impact our quorum.
Mr. Doran.
I don't think you're alone on that.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
But I think this would add clarity to that if we're really, that's.
So I would support, from what I'm hearing, and I'm not a chair of any standing committee other than legislative, setting it for something, a quorum of like 6 that just covers our bases, so that no matter what, quorum is made and people can start meeting. And then you still should keep a record of if a majority of your board is not there, and then we fix the AR. We cut more members if it's becoming a problem. We build back up. But I would feel awful for somebody who sits around till 6 p.m. in a meeting waiting for a quorum, and then you cancel and you all go home. That seems like a colossal waste of people's valuable time. Ms. Marati.
I'm not opposed to that. I just would love to hear from the chair of the Family Engagement Committee and the Curriculum Committee, because I think that's really close to what we already have as a quorum. If my math is correct, we've got 13 on the curriculum. That includes 2 non-voting, so it's even less. And then 12 on the Family Engagement Committee, which minus 2 is only 10. So is that going to be an issue for them? I don't want to make it harder, actually, than make it easier to make a quorum.
And it's half plus 1, right? So if it was 13, then that is 7. Okay. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you. So just a couple things that I want to note as we're having this discussion. One is that there's a section in Robert's Rules on Proceedings in the absence of a quorum that says, you know, you can't transact business, but you can take certain actions such as fixing a time to adjourn, take recess, or taking measures to obtain a quorum. I think also it wouldn't necessarily, like, maybe we need some clarity from legal or something, but, or from a parliamentarian, but I don't think it actually necessarily needs to stop a meeting from taking place if there's not going to be action taken. Like if we're just having a discussion, I think it might be okay to have that committee meeting still. So that is something that we could consider moving forward. I do think that for the curriculum, speaking about the curriculum committee in particular, and my experience this year, and knowing that there are deadlines that have to be met in order to get the balls rolling at appropriate times, I think that I would strongly be in favor of reducing the quorum requirement to probably 5. And currently, that's only a couple less than a majority. And so I just think that the work is important enough that it needs to get done. And if someone can't show up at the last minute because of, you know, whatever, get stuck in the ditch or who knows, you know, I think it would be best if we still have the ability to continue that meeting. And I do want to say that I absolutely agree with Mr. Doran that we want, the ideal is to have as many people there as possible. And I don't want to exclude people because they can't make it. But, you know, there's some of these committees, the work has to get done on a timeline, and we need to build in ways to make sure that that will happen. And one other thing, but I'll come back around if I remember what it was.
Ms. Burnett.
So after some digging and clarification on PEC, we are not including vacancies. So for Wednesday, I would need a quorum of 7. With these changes, I would still need a quorum of 6. So, or if we went to 5, but with 11, I think I would still need 6 voting, correct?
I was saying, would 5 work?
Yes, so yeah, that was where I was. So the whole discussion on quorum, I don't want to violate Robert's rules, I don't want to violate law, and I don't know where that goes, but 5, I am in support of that.
So just to speak to law and Robert's rules, my understanding is in bylaw, we can make our quorum whatever number we pick and we choose, and then we need to follow that. In absence of a quorum written out in bylaw, then it is half plus 1. Mr. Doran.
The specific language, sorry, is a majority, but that means half plus 1, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Doran.
You want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. I think that it comes down to what is our hopes really for our committees. Half of the people there, I mean, we're missing half, and I think it makes sense to do it. We need a quorum piece. I still say strongly that it's a majority because we're talking, for the most part, one person difference. I do, what Mr. Burgess was saying, I always held, but it's never been our practice in this district, is if we were less than a quorum, we could still exchange information. We can't take any action. And so in some ways, yes, some of the business, information can be shared. It has been the practice of this district not to do that. But I certainly feel that, we're mostly going around one person, and I do think that we use majority in a lot of the situations. I still strongly favor majority. It's not much of a difference. We're still potentially missing half the people. And certainly, I think in practice, we could share information if, but there couldn't be there couldn't be committee action, so.
So my concern would be holding a committee meeting without a quorum. You would still have to follow all of the Open Meetings Act requirements. These are committees underneath the board and therefore have an Open Meetings Act requirement. So I don't know why you wouldn't just set a quorum then and allow people to talk and move forward. Like, I feel 5, if we're having 2 committees that are important committees that aren't able to reliably meet quorum, we allow them to continue their work and hope that eventually we have high aspirations for our committees like we do for our students, but sometimes we have to baby step to get there. And so we have a way to do that and then come back and review. But not to belabor the point, we have 2 options here that we're diverging. Either we can set a quorum in AR and kind of say most of us have gelled around an idea, or we can say that this AR needs to come before the board to officially vote on that quorum if there seems like less than a majority that wants to go that way. I'm going to go Ms. Marati, Mr. Burgess, Mr. Doran.
Just to speak to that, I support a quorum of 5. At least for the family engagement and curriculum committees, because they have been reduced so low. If not for all committees, I think that's fine in my book.
Yeah, I'm still at 5. I think that that's a good number, and I would say that we should include the budget committee in that. And again, the hope is always that everyone shows up, but that we can't hamstring ourselves if that isn't the case. The other thing that I wanted to bring up earlier that I'll be very brief because I think we're going to get to it, but another way to help with the quorum problem would be for the chairs to be keeping really good track of who is in attendance and who is missing meetings. If we have people who are chronically absent, we have in our policy a way to remove them, and I think that we can actually improve that. Yeah. So we don't have to speak to that part of this yet because I think we'll get to it. But I just wanted to bring that up too as another way to help.
Mr. Doran.
Just a concern about specifying a specific number is that if there are enough vacancies, we might not have 5 people. And so 5 commits you to 5, where majority gives you that flex depending upon the committee. So,
Could we craft it to 5 or a majority of members, whichever is lesser?
And I would say that we would want to be really specific when we use the word majority. If we're talking about filled seats, that we should specifically say the majority of filled
Filled
positions.
voting seats,
Yeah.
or whichever is lesser. So it gives us the option of going with the smaller number. Ms. Maple.
I support doing the 5. On the other end of this, having a lower quorum requirement can actually long-term save a committee. I look to what happened with the commissions, with the one that I'm on with the borough, and if we had lower quorum requirements, that commission would still exist. Because once it was missed so many times, that gives anybody a leg to stand on to say, this isn't valuable. So I agree, the goal is more the goal is to have everybody show up, to not have to rely on this. But I think that it could end up in the long term protecting a committee, especially if there are, a group of people appointed for a certain year that like it's really consistently going to be a problem. So I support going with the language that President Hardy just suggested, the 5, or I'm not going to try to repeat it.
I'm hearing a majority of filled positions or 5, whichever one is great. Viewer, yeah.
Filled voting, you said.
Filled voting. So I heard that there was people who wanted, I believe, to discuss this page, front of AR, like you saw, page 3, I think you said, Mr. Doran, and I just wanted to make sure that that we've finished the quorum discussion and the size of committees, so now would be an appropriate time to circle back to other things. I still have things on my list. I think the only thing we're going to get through tonight is going to be committees, because I don't want to stay past like 8:30 would be my latest. So even earlier, but we're at 7:35. I would love to get through the committees section. Ms. Marati?
Just for clarification, on page 1, it says the superintendent will solicit volunteer membership for each committee that is representative of the school district and community. Members will include employees, parents, students, and community members. So that is a change from what we currently do, where the committee chair selects those. So if you could help me understand that.
I believe it's just saying that they're assisting in getting people to want to apply. And I have something else I'd like to talk, but it's still, we haven't gotten to who decides who's on committees yet.
Okay.
That would be something, fixing policy in AR.
Sorry, yeah. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? If we
Yep.
just add the word, the superintendent will solicit volunteer membership applications, that makes it more clear, I think.
And I'd like to, because it's a good place with that, to put in there that we should have a common app for all committees, and then they just can select what committee they want to apply from, because we have all these varying different apps. It's a lot for people to manage.
Yes.
And then they can select more than one in case it's filled in one place. We can say, oh, you also applied for this one. We have spots here, and it gives us a common pool to draw from.
You mean one Google form? Is that what you're referring to? Okay.
I have others, but I can wait if you want.
Go for it. Mr. Doran, was that a hand? I don't want to.
I do one on the key, but she also had another one on that page, the legislative committee.
Ms. Marati, then Mr. Doran.
I don't have a legislative committee. Where shall chair the legislative? Oh, we'll just have to make a change to it based on the conversation we just had. The 4th paragraph talks about the legislative committee assigning 2 additional board members. We'd have to change that. Probably. And then similarly on the first paragraph of the AR, we'd strike audit committee. And just a issue that the ad hoc committee talked about in 2022, and it's nags me every time. There's an issue in the wording throughout all of the committee policies and ARs. It says board chair instead of committee chair. And so on the AR, under additional voluntary board committee members as applicable shall be assigned as follows. The sentence, parent and community members, so obviously we'll have to change the word parent, application process with final selection made by board chair. So that should probably be committee chair if that's what we're going to do. This came up a couple years ago. It caused a huge kerfuffle because the board chair made a decision when the committee chair actually should have made the decision, and this policy just is really messy sometimes. And that's it.
Mr. Doran, then Ms. Burnett.
Okay, to that one on page 3, it's under the AR, is that bullet about the application process with final selection made by board chair. I find that problematic. I think that it has been practice of our, for decades, that it's basically a first come, first serve. And I think that that's important. As a board member, I feel like I chair the meeting to make sure all voices are heard. That I don't select who's on there. That's my framework, and I think there's an importance to that, because we want to make sure that there's a broad, they don't have to agree with me, that's fine. That's an important piece. I do think that there's also, in practicality, in most cases, it's not an issue. Once in a while, it runs up where, a group of people will get together and say, there are 3 things, so if we put them all in together, we're going to be in the same line, and we're going to be on the committee, and you can stack a committee that from outside the committee on the first come, first serve. But I do think that, it's important to touch base with the committee chair, and I agree when we go through changing it to committee chair, because who happens to be a board member, does help for clarity in that. I think it's important that they have they're notified of, like, basically who's next in line, so they can add their voice of welcome, et cetera, to it. But I do have real concerns about the chair, the committee chair, making the final selection. And especially if we might only be on for 1 year, but those other terms change. So that is a real concern for me.
Burnett.
So, couple things. Earlier when Ms. Marati was going through, I don't know if she had said the parental engagement, that needs to be changed to family engagement. Maybe you did. I was half paying attention. I apologize. But also, I think this page also is part of the AR, and it's the one that at the top, it starts with the superintendent may assign additional district staff. So in that smaller second paragraph, this is just a finicky thing, recommendations from each board committee will be presented to the school board as appropriate by the board chair via written reports, is what it says. And we've already gone through earlier and said that that would be committee chair, and so that just needs to be changed to committee chair.
So what I'm hearing the current discussion is around, do we want our committee's assignments to be determined by the committee chair, or do we want our committee assignments to be first come, first serve? And this was one of those sticking points that made this policy, because our practice and our policies aren't matching. Ms. Marati.
Yeah, I have firsthand experience in the damage that not having a practice in policy can do. I understand the liability perception of the chair making that decision. However, we have experienced people applying for nefarious reasons, very nefarious reasons, publicly stating that they're going to apply to take down that committee. So I think having the chair have the ability to say no in those types of cases could benefit the district wide and keeping a committee productive and efficient and moving forward. But I also see, I don't know, I'm not going to be very helpful because I also see the liability issue in a committee chair making that decision. I also, on that same page that Ms. Burnett was just talking about, the one that starts with the superintendent may assign additional district staff, at the bottom under meetings, I don't know, I love the rest of through the chair, the rest of the board's opinion on this. I don't know if that first sentence is needed where it says it's encouraged, the committee is encouraged to schedule quarterly meetings. On the committees that I've served as chair, we haven't done quarterly meetings. That has not been enough to complete the work needed for that committee. And so to encourage that doesn't really make sense, especially when it goes on to say that they can adopt alternative schedules as necessary within the school term to accomplish prescribed tasks. I do think that the rest of that sentence is important to point out that we can't meet during holidays and breaks and whatnot, but to encourage quarterly, I don't know if that's needed.
So I'm actually going to stand behind Ms. Marati on this. I firsthand have experience with also nefarious issues going on with joining a committee. And I have, both committees that I've been a part of has been a first come, first serve. Whoever applies, I have allowed onto the committee. And I have found that that is and can actually be problematic. And while I don't want to, I'm very careful here. I do not want to silence anybody, and everybody deserves to be there. Everybody deserves a chance. But there are situations where that member can sometimes actually be counterproductive to what the committee is trying to do. And the committee is trying to do work for the board.
Mr. Burgess, and then I'm going to put myself in the queue.
So I hear both viewpoints, and I think it's all very valid, and I appreciate it, appreciate the discussion. My suggestion would be that we say that applications in general will be approved on a first-come, first-served basis, but then add in reasons that an applicant could be denied. So, and, you know, we could spell out a couple, like, has made statements that, you know, they you know, or whatever, like, just, I guess I don't know exactly how to craft that, but I think that there should be some clear language about, like, when we have the ability to turn someone away. That might fix it. I don't, you know, again, what the specific language is matters a great deal. That's one potential fix, just as a brainstorming idea here. The other thing that would help is, you know, the ability to remove members who are not acting in good faith. And that could be included in, you know, as well, as another way to try and protect us and the committees.
Mr. Doran, then Ms. Burnett.
Okay. To that one, I like, I mean, if it's a first come, first served, that's the process. But though it can be difficult, I'd like to explore what Ms. Burgess is talking about in terms of maybe exceptions to that. And it would have to be carefully crafted because you know, often enough times we could have someone who says, I'm getting on, I mean, we've had people run for the board for a reason because of their kid, and they realize, oh, there's a bigger picture here and stuff. And I think on the committees, I'm going to get on that committee because I'm going to tell them what to do. And they learn, and sometimes they become the greatest advocates within that. But I just made a notation again. I don't have the wording, but I think it's maybe worth exploring that because I think it is good that people know first. They may or may not know the chair on that committee. And they may think, well, they're going to pick their friends or somebody that they know or something like this. And in a sense, that was what the problem was with the board committees before, when board members made the specific committees. Unless you knew a board member, you didn't get on. And so I think the openness of this has worked to our advantage. And it's worth looking at what the expected norms are, which might address both if somebody is on as well as otherwise. But I think the general sense of first come, first serve, and look at that other. Since we're on that one, I do want to come back to the recommendations of the committees, and I do want to make sure we get to the ad hoc advisory, so when we get to those.
So, in respect to time, we all feel some type of way is what I'm gathering on this. And I support what Mr. Burgess was saying. Maybe what we could do is table this section, give it to Luke and our admin, and maybe see if you guys could draft something, a little language revolved around what to do when we have a committee member who is not serving the purpose of the committee. Maybe we could figure something like that out that would have some language. It can go into the AR, and then that would give us a backup. So if we do have a nefarious character, we could then say, okay, we're sorry, we're going to have to go ahead and replace you now in the name of time, and then we can move on to something else.
Ms. Marati, then Dr. Minor.
I would be in support of changing the process, so it's changing that sentence to a first come, first serve application acceptance if we add something like Mr. Burgess and Ms. Burnett suggested, reasons to dismiss and the authority of the committee chair to make that decision. I think that would protect our committees from nefarious characters.
Dr. Minor.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and this is one area that I would want to run by legal and have them help us draft it. And so if you gave us a little bit of time to do that and bring it back, I think that's a really good suggestion.
In support of all of that, two other little things that are on my list that I'd like us to look at. It's the same page 29 from this one, but not yours. The AR, that first page at the very bottom, and I assume it's about the same. One of the bullets says district employees may not serve in the capacity of a parent or community member on board committees. And I don't think that we should have that. And my reasoning being that yes, we have representation chosen by the unions, but we have eliminated an enormous base of our community from serving on committees just because they work for the district. And I don't think that's fair. When I was a teacher at Tanana, I wasn't really active in the union, so I'm not going to get picked to get on the committee that way, but I also then can't apply to be a parent or a community member. My service to the district and my job does not negate my role as a parent. So it's hurting our ability there. Ms. Burnett.
I wouldn't disagree, but I would limit the language to maybe not include admin. Not that I expect any of our admin would want to join a committee and spend more time here, but I would like to not include admin in that.
I think admin has a lot of voice and in ways to get board members' ears, so I'm in support of that. But I think the general ESSA person who might not be there, or just there's lots of teachers, there's lots of people who work, if they work in nutrition services, they're then also, like, we've conflicted out a lot of people just because we're one of the largest employers inside the entire Fairbanks community. Dr. Minor.
Clarification on administration. That could be pretty broad, and I don't necessarily disagree, but just clarification on who you mean when you say administration.
Ms. Burnett.
Clarification meaning anybody downtown that is considered you or anybody who sits over there.
Directors.
Executive directors, how's that? I don't know what the terminology would be to address the administration who sits here at our meetings on Tuesday nights and are here at our work sessions. That's who I'm referring to.
You have thoughts?
I do have thoughts. I mean, that's a subset of a larger group, so I think it's interesting just to rule out executive directors. I mean, I think they would have the same concerns maybe as you do, is that they don't necessarily have a lot of voice all the time. I mean, just because they sit in the back of the room doesn't mean that they get to talk about diversity topics or something that they're passionate about.
I'm also fine saying it can be anybody that has a parent. Like if you're a parent and you have a kid in our school, you have a different voice, but then you're speaking from your parent perspective.
Can I clarify just real quick?
And we totally, yes, clarify real quick, and then I've jumped the gun, Ms. Marati, Mr. Doran.
The only reason I proposed that and said that was because I just didn't want it to make it seem like I was trying to throw more duties onto anybody. I'm not trying to be inequitable or anything like that, so.
Ms. Marati?
With Ms. Burnett's clarity, I suggest including admin in the group of employees that can serve in the capacity of a parent, unless there's other reasons. I would like to add in this section, probably at the end, if that's where it fits best, clarity about parents serving as community members, because over the last 6 years, each board president has taken their own translation of what that means, and it flip-flops and it's super frustrating. So if we could have it in policy that parents can serve as community members, then that would be probably easier for boards going forward.
Mr. Doran?
Okay, so first to the parent employees, I disagree. I think I've actually liked that perspective on our deal. We have our employees involved, have a voice at the table. I think it's been good that we've said to the associations that it should be something that goes out to the general leadership, not just simply pulled from their general membership, not something a person just automatically pulled from their leadership. Yes, our employee group is a large group. A percentage of that are parents, but I look at these committees as getting as broad a voice as we can, and the parent non-employee group is significantly larger. Just kind of threw it out there, is probably 10,000 to 1,000, type of thing. But and I've used those numbers not as accurate numbers, but just the perspective. I think it helps us being less insular, and our employees have numerous avenues to voice their thoughts, and so in trying to involve as many voices across the board, I think the limitations that we have now are very appropriate. So I know we keep going back and forth on different things, and I just want to stay on that topic right now, and I'll get back in the queue for other topics.
Not seeing anyone, I will add in that employees can't run for the school board. They're already conflicted out of that. You have to give up your job if you were to run for the school board. So, and as somebody who worked as a district employee for many years before becoming on the school board, I did not feel like my voice was heard or that I had a great way of making it known. And too often employees are afraid to speak out. But being able to apply for a parent position and be very clear that I'm speaking as a parent gives them an avenue to have a voice and not feel like they have to represent their association or the interest that they've been appointed to that committee for. They are parents. They deserve to be able to speak as parents or community members. I'm not seeing any more debate on that, so it seems like a general consensus is that the board is okay. So we're going to move forward with striking that from AR.
Okay, it's
Mr.
not a
Doran?
consensus.
General consensus is just a majority, unless there is other, so Ms. Marati, you were out of the room. We're wondering if we have general consensus around the district employees being allowed to serve as community or parent members. Okay, so I'm seeing a general consensus. We are 1 minute till.
Move to extend.
Well, you don't have to extend, we end it whenever we want, but I
Oh,
still
yeah,
would
we
like
can't make
us-
motions.
Yeah, I would like us to be quick. My one last thing that I had on here, actually, I think we might have fixed mine. Sorry, guys. It was something else. It has an issue in this one. Mr. Burgess, then Mr. Doran.
So I spoke to this earlier, and I think that this is something, I just want to make sure that it was captured, that in addition to the ability to deny an applicant, that we're also going to add language on ability to remove member, okay. And then kind of along the same lines, the very last line of the AR under attendance, I think that we can improve that. There's a couple challenges I have. So it's right now the language says if a voting member misses more than 50% of the meetings for the current school year, that member may be dismissed and replaced by the board chair. And it should be committee chair. So there's two things that I see as problematic there. One is that some of our committee members have a one-year term. So by the time they've missed half of the meetings in the school year, they're done with their term anyway. So I'd like to see that get fixed, maybe a different timeline. The other thing, rather than just having a percentage of meetings missed, so maybe it would be prudent to add like a number of meetings in a row that are missed, and I would suggest 3 would be that number. Because, yeah, if someone's just not showing up, is chronically absent, then I think that's impairing our ability to do work, and we need to replace that member.
Mr. Doran.
Okay, couple of things on page 6. We've gone back and forth in terms of that, the top recommendations from each board committee was presented to the school board as appropriate. I think they should go through the administration because a lot of those recommendations are, when I think of curriculum ones, they're actually coming from the administration to the curriculum committee and then coming back, and if there are any feedback from that, same thing with policy, it's feedback to it. Same thing with budget, basically. I mean, most of our committees, they're giving feedback, and it allows administration to make adjustments and wordings within that and take those things into account in crafting a budget or crafting the final things. I don't know that the word needs to be through the administration or through the superintendent, but in coordination or collaboration with them. I think that's important, that there's that piece there, because there are also a lot of times from a committee, we may not always understand all the amplifications, and so it makes sure that the administration can address those as things go on to the board, or get back to the committee and say, okay, I know you recommended this, but this is the complications with it, implications of something, where do you stand? How do you feel? You're giving that more information to it. So I think that needs to be there. Did come up in terms of terms that that may be something, I like the clarity, some of the clarifications that Ms. Marati mentioned, but in terms of terms, we may want to relook at that too. Because it's really awkward in a sense when they happen in November, and it's somewhat unclear when, you've got members started involved, but then they're coming off and new ones coming on that, if we make it the school year type of thing, the only thing that happens in November is really the board member who becomes the committee chair may change, because that's dependent on the president, but that's only one member. Everybody else, you get that consistency. It might help with that.
So, if I'm understanding you right, you would like to change and help me wordsmith it, but recommendations from each board committee will be presented through the administration to the school board as appropriate? Dr. Minor.
So I'm thinking around this a bit, and I do think that muddies the water in terms of who's delivering the report, who owns the report. I've seen at times this year where administration and the committee chair might have not been on the same page in terms of either the administration's recommendation might differ from what's actually coming out of committee, and so I think it might blur it at times with the proposed language if it's through administration. I almost prefer keeping it separate because you have the committee recommendation, and then you'll hear an administration recommendation or a response to that. And so I guess would caution the board of merging those together at the committee level, because I think it is really important to hear that committee feedback unfiltered from the administration.
What if it said in collaboration or in something like that instead of through?
I think that's fine. I think at the end of the day, it would be helpful for the public to know who owns the report and whose viewpoint that's coming from.
Ms. Burnett, Ms. Marati, Mr. Doran.
So I'd actually like to support Dr. Minor in that. I know that I've been on a committee as a chair with my admin. We were mostly on the same page, but when it came to what came out of committee, I had a different recommendation than what Mr. Beam had. And while we were close, I think you're right, not having that finality between this is me, that's him. So maybe collaboration is the right word. I don't know. I would honestly just leave it be. That's where I'm at.
Ms. Marati, then Mr. Doran.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Doran, but it sounded like it was more like a review by admin and probably superintendent, similar to when a board member wants something on an agenda, we go through channels, and so it sounded more like it was like a review by admin and the board chair, not a buy-in or like an ownership of. And in that case, I think we could word it to have it reviewed or something like that by admin and board chair prior to, and that's what I do naturally. I thought it was actually just what we're supposed to do. So I run everything by both of you before it would ever become before the board. And then a couple things that the ad hoc committee also recommended was that the board accept applications only in the month of October in order for everyone to be on the same timeline. And then the the committee chair, then selects the applicants from that pool that they receive in October. That was just a recommendation from the committee. Also, the ad hoc committee recommended that something be in here similar to the board's policy on being able to attend meetings via Zoom or virtually, something in the committee policies for the same reason.
Mr. Doran.
Yeah, I don't want to muddy the water. I want to avoid muddying the water, and that's why through may not be the word. But I think it's worth giving some thought to how this works in practice. That, and I think I'd come to the point that it's the committee recommendation. It's not the administrative member recommendation or the board committee chair member recommendation. We have those opportunities, especially as a board member. We make our recommendations from on the table. This is from the committee. What I am trying to work, and I've seen it over different situations, different years, different groups, that it doesn't become an end run around the administration, but also to strengthen the recommendation that might come from the committee. That situation where the committee had a lot of suggestions, and to do the final recommendation, really it needed to come back. The administration needed to look at those, make the changes, and then come back to the committee for really that final decision. And it became very awkward when it came before the board, because in that particular case, and this was several years ago, the administration did not take the input from the committee. And it came, so we were at odds in giving the committee chair's report and what was coming to the thing. So I think there is some collaborative piece. I am not sure of the appropriate wording not to bog it down. I think it's worth some thought, and maybe just in talking about it, it's making sure how do we work that practice, and that it is really important. I think it's really important that when I look as a board member on a committee, that I have my recommendation later. I may be able to raise some issues or things to think about to the committee because of the broad perspective as a board member, but it's their recommendation. So,
Dr. Minor.
I appreciate the clarification, and I think I do support now some language around in collaboration with. I think that was really helpful for you to talk around that a bit, and so maybe we can wordsmith that, but in collaboration with administration or something along those lines.
So it is 8:11. I know we already have some work that we're setting forth, so I don't think this is going to be ready to be brought forward in front of the board on the 7th anyways with what we're working on. I would love for the administration to go through and make some of those recommendations, talk to legal, get those pieces. If they have recommendation on term limits that Mr. Doran mentioned, that would be helpful for us to have the next time we look it over, if we want to make everyone 2 years or everyone 1 year, and what the admin team's thoughts on that, since oftentimes they're the steady people from year to year, if any of that would be helpful. But I think we did good work. We only made it through, but we knew this one would be controversial, and we didn't really talk about any of it. We'd kept tabling it. Mr. Doran.
and I think in terms of what you're saying, going ahead, I would perhaps like to suggest that in the meantime, on the ad hoc advisory, that we make a distinction or figure out a distinction between ad hoc advisory committees on this, which is broader than the board, and when we sometimes have a task committee from the board, we've referred to it as ad hoc, and it becomes confusing. So maybe just some research on would help.
So when we get to that ad hoc advisory committee, there are changes, and one of them is board members in the number of 3 or less may collaborate on any matter in which they choose. They do not constitute an ad hoc committee. An ad hoc committee is created through the board, through board direction. So that kind of gives us, if the board makes it, it's an ad hoc. It's a OMA committee. If the board doesn't direct the president to create it, it's board member working group.
Okay, again, I don't want to belabor it tonight. We'll come back to it, but we have done it from the dais. We appoint 3 people at ad hoc committee to do contract negotiation. or such. We have loosely used the term, and I just want to see whether, maybe research in between to get to some clarity between the two things.
Yep, and I can have us send out, I believe Ms. Dolan has a memo on that. I know I at least asked her for it. If the board makes it, it's an ad hoc, or it is at least under OMA, if it's done through board direction. That got us in some weird areas this year, so we definitely want to clean it up. With that, Ms. Dillard, you look like you had something.
Just real quick, so am I hearing, I'm hearing we're not going to talk about ad hoc advisory committees tonight. However, as far as what we accomplished on this policy draft was to target what an ad hoc advisory committee would be. So do we also want language about what would be an advisory committee that would not meet the level of ad hoc? Is that what I'm hearing?
Perhaps a separate policy that talks about one that doesn't fall under OMA. So
Okay.
it could be a working group or something. That's the thing. Ad hoc is defined in the Open Meetings Act, and any committee created by a board, it was that thing we talked about, then has all the burden of OMA. If we're just having 3 members talk in a working group that isn't officially created through board action, it doesn't fall under OMA, it's underneath the threshold, and those are helpful. And so we need to have clear guidelines on what those two things are. One other thing that would be great to have when we have committees come back is a description of the charges of each committee. That was something ASB says, and I don't see in here, and that way we can make sure we have clear charges for each committee in policy, or at least AR. Dr. Meinhardt?
Those descriptions, is that work that you would like administration to craft that language and bring it back? Okay.
That
Thank
would
you.
be great. Not seeing anything further from the board. Mr. Doran?
Just a procedural thing. Would it be not too burdensome to date the pages, the files? Because as we get rewrites, et cetera, it's to be able to keep track of that we're working with the most current one.
Yes.
Okay, and I really appreciate the page numbers. That's been great. Thank you.
Great work tonight. I'm going to say we're adjourned.